High above the harbor atop Victoria Peak, the city of Hong Kong glows like a galaxy. Glass towers, neon veins, a skyline that hums with wealth. But just a few metro stops away in the dense maze of Sham Shui Po, there exists another world. Here in a forgotten building nicknamed The Hive, dozens of people sleep in wooden boxes stacked like shipping crates. An old man named Mr. Fong has lived in one for 17 years. He teaches calligraphy by day by night. He returns to a space barely larger than a coffin.
今年啊叫做最熱㗎啦，多咗4度至5度到啦。今年就平時都熱㗎啦，不過就冇今年咁犀利。
熱成點啊？
佢而家覺得好似好透氣都難。呢把風扇如果係即係初咧都用得嘅，而家咧就有好慢喎，所以就唔用啦。呢把抽氣扇咧有嘅，本來而家又唔用得㗎啦。我成日都飲水㗎啦，冇辦法啦，幾樽水喺度。
A city that trades billions daily yet buries its poor alive. This is not dystopia. This is today. Number 1, life inside coffin homes. Imagine living in a space no bigger than a refrigerator box, barely long enough to stretch your legs, too narrow to stand, and just tall enough to sit upright. That's the reality for over 200,000 people in Hong Kong today. They live in what the media grimly calls coffin homes, wooden or metal boxes squeezed into subdivided apartments, often stacked 2 or even 3 high. Each home measures around 1.5 to 2 square meters. Inside, there's room for a thin mattress, a fan, and a few personal belongings. If you're lucky, there's no window, no privacy, and certainly no space to breathe. These cramped spaces are often carved out of dilapidated buildings in older districts like Sham Shui Po and Mong Kok. Dozens of tenants might share a single floor crammed together like sardines. They all use one communal toilet and a tiny, grease-blackened kitchen, conditions ripe for the spread of disease. Mold creeps across the ceilings. The walls sweat in summer, insects scurry across the floor. Hygiene is a daily battle, and dignity, a luxury most have long forgotten. And yet people pay to live here. Not a few coins, but shockingly high amounts. Rent for a single coffin unit can range from 100 to 2,500 Hong Kong dollars per month. That's roughly 13 to 320 US dollars. Think about that. In a city with some of the highest real estate prices on earth, even this sliver of space comes at a premium. Why would anyone choose this life? The truth is they don't. They endure it. Many of the residents are elderly. Some are disabled. Others work full-time jobs, delivery drivers, cleaners, restaurant staff, earning just enough to survive, but never enough to escape. These homes are not shelters. They're the only option left for people who fall through the cracks of one of the richest economies in Asia. But the damage isn't just physical, it's deeply psychological. A study by the Society for Community Organization found that over 60% of coffin home dwellers report symptoms of depression, anxiety, and chronic stress. Imagine returning home after a long day of work, only to crawl into a box. There's no sunlight, no fresh air, no escape. One resident told researchers, "You stop dreaming after a while. You stop hoping." Isolation adds another invisible weight. These units are too small to host visitors, too claustrophobic to feel human. Many residents eat alone, sleep alone, suffer alone. In a metropolis of 7 million, they feel utterly unseen. And yet this is just the beginning. Because what led Hong Kong to this crisis didn't happen overnight. It was a slow burn, decades in the making, and the further we look back, the clearer we understand how the past has trapped the present and what must change to free the future. Number 2, how the crisis began. To understand how Hong Kong became a city of sky-high towers and ground-level despair, we have to go way back to the early 1950s. At that time, the city was a British colony already bustling, but nowhere near the dense metropolis we see today. Then came a tidal wave, not of water, but of people. Waves of migrants began pouring in from mainland China. Fleeing political unrest, poverty, and instability, hundreds of thousands sought refuge in what they saw as a land of opportunity. By the end of the decade, Hong Kong's population had more than doubled. From just over 2 million in 1951, the number skyrocketed to nearly 4.5 million by the early 1970s. That explosive growth, faster than the city could physically build, became the first spark in a slow-burning housing crisis. The government, unprepared and under-resourced, scrambled to respond. But building large-scale public housing takes time, and time was something Hong Kong didn't have. So what happened instead? Chaos found its way into concrete. Squatter settlements mushroomed across the city's hillsides and back alleys. Tin roof shelters, hand-built from scrap wood and metal sheets, became home to thousands. These informal slums were vulnerable to fire floods and disease. But for many, it was better than nothing. In the late 1950s and early 60s, the government did begin developing public housing estates, like the now famous Shek Kip Mei estate, built after a devastating fire wiped out a squatter community. But demand always outpaced supply. Every new building filled up before the cement had even dried. Fast forward to the 1980s and 90s, and a new trend had quietly taken hold: subdivided flats. Landlords, seeing a lucrative opportunity in a desperate market, began slicing up old apartments into tiny rental units. A 2-bedroom flat might be cut into 4, 5, even 6 separate rooms. Bathrooms became communal, kitchens disappeared. Hallways turned into shared living spaces. These chopped-up homes were never meant to be permanent. But in Hong Kong, the temporary often becomes tradition. By the early 2000s, as real estate prices soared, these subdivided flats shrank even further, eventually giving birth to the now infamous coffin homes. And here's where the numbers hit hard. According to data released by the Hong Kong Housing Authority in 2024, over 220,000 people now live in subdivided units. That's more than the entire population of Iceland, crammed into spaces not much bigger than a closet. And the waiting list for public housing. It stretches endlessly, an average of 5.6 years, with some families waiting more than a decade just to move out of unsafe or overcrowded units. But let's be clear, this isn't the story of bad luck or poor planning alone. It's the result of decades of choices: economic, political, and social. Land, scarcity, colonial legacy, speculative real estate markets, and a rigid bureaucracy have all played their part in shaping today's broken housing landscape. So when we look at those tiny boxes stacked inside decaying buildings, we're not just seeing poverty. We're seeing the consequences of 70 years of policy gaps, of a city running faster than its people can catch up. And perhaps the most haunting part, it didn't have to be this way. But without change, this crisis won't stay buried in the past. It will only grow, spilling into the present and casting a long, heavy shadow over Hong Kong's future. Number 3. When housing becomes investment. From the ashes of overcrowded squatter camps to the rise of subdivided flats, Hong Kong's housing crisis has always been a story of scarcity. But in recent decades, it's taken a new, more insidious form, not from a lack of space, but from who controls it. Hong Kong's real estate market is by every measure one of the most expensive on the planet. According to the latest Global Housing Affordability Survey released in early 2025, the average home in Hong Kong costs nearly 19 times the annual median household income. To put it plainly, if a middle-class family saved every cent they earned, no food, no bills, no transport, it would still take them almost 2 decades to afford a modest apartment. This isn't just a housing market, it's a fortress, and for many there's no way in. But here's the catch. It's not that Hong Kong doesn't have homes. The problem is that too many of them aren't really homes at all. They're assets, investment tools, safe havens for capital. In the past 2 decades, a growing portion of the city's housing stock has been snapped up by investors, both local and international, who have no intention of living there. Some apartments sit empty for years, treated like high-yield bank accounts in the sky. Others are rented out at exorbitant prices far beyond the reach of everyday citizens. It's a strange irony towers that pierce the clouds filled with silence. This speculative fever has created a dangerous imbalance. As more and more properties are hoarded for profit, the number of affordable homes available for real people keeps shrinking. According to data from the Hong Kong Housing Society, fewer than 25% of households can now afford to buy property without assistance. Even renting is a struggle. And the struggle cuts deep, even into the ranks of what used to be the comfortable middle class. Take teachers, for example. In 2025, a secondary school teacher in Hong Kong earns an average of about 40,000 Hong Kong dollars a month. That's roughly 5,100 US dollars. Sounds decent, right? But when the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in urban districts hovers around 20,000 Hong Kong dollars, half the monthly salary, it's clear decent isn't enough. Now imagine being a nurse, a civil engineer, a social worker, jobs that keep the city running, people who give their lives to serve others only to return home to a space they can barely afford, or worse, to a subdivided flat no bigger than a parking spot. The dream of home ownership. For many, it's no longer a dream, it's a cruel joke. And yet, as the divide grows wider, luxury condos keep rising. Flashy advertisements promise a life of elegance and status. Live above it all, they say. But for the rest of the city, those living below it all, the message rings hollow. So what happens when a city builds upward but leaves its people behind? When owning a home becomes less about living and more about profiting? The answer is written all over Hong Kong's skyline, a city of glass and steel reflecting the widening gap between wealth and reality, between hope and survival, between the ones who own and the ones who never will. And as the market soars, the question hangs in the air like smog. Who is Hong Kong really being built for? Number 4, government solutions and their limits. Now you might be wondering, has the government just stood by and watched this happen? The short answer is no. Over the past decade, the Hong Kong government has introduced a series of policies to tackle the housing crisis. Some of these efforts look good on paper. There are regulations now in place that set minimum size requirements for subdivided flats, an attempt to stop landlords from chopping up apartments into closets and calling them homes. There's also been a push to build more public housing, more micro homes, and more affordable rental units. In fact, in early 2025, the Housing Bureau announced a plan to supply over 30,000 new public housing units by the end of the year. That sounds like a step forward, right? But here's where the story gets complicated. While the government's intentions might be in the right place, the outcomes often fall short or worse, create unintended consequences. Let's talk about one of the most controversial moves, the crackdown on subdivided flats. At first glance, banning tiny, unsafe living spaces sounds like a no-brainer. But the truth is, many of these coffin homes, as awful as they are still the only option for low-income residents. When you force landlords to shut them down or renovate them to meet higher standards, what happens next? Rents go up, supply shrinks, and the poorest residents get pushed even further to the margins. It's like trying to fix a leaky roof by tearing down the whole house without building a new one. According to a study released in January 2025 by the Society for Community Organization, nearly 65% of tenants in subdivided flats fear that stricter housing regulations will price them out of even their current homes, and their fear is not unfounded. In neighborhoods like Tai Kok Tsui and Sham Shui, monthly rents for converted units rose by as much as 30% after new regulations were introduced in 2023. So while the goal is safety and dignity, the reality for many is displacement and despair. And let's not forget, building more public housing isn't a fast solution either. These projects take years to complete. Land shortages, bureaucratic red tape, and political gridlock often delay construction timelines. Even when units are built, the waiting list for public housing remains painfully long, averaging 5 to 6 years, depending on family size and income level. Meanwhile, micro homes, those so-called affordable alternatives, raise their own set of questions. Some of these units are as small as 100 square feet, about the size of a parking space. Can a space that's small truly offer dignity? Or is it just a sanitized version of the same old problem? And here's the most telling sign: public response. Community feedback to these government efforts has been complicated. Some residents welcome any action, any sign that someone is paying attention. But many others are skeptical, even fearful. They worry that what's being offered isn't really a solution, but a shuffle. Move the poor from one box to another, from one unaffordable flat to a slightly less unaffordable one. One elderly tenant put it best. They say they want to help us, but they're helping us out the door. In the end, policy without people in mind is just paperwork. You can't legislate dignity if you ignore the lives behind the leases. And so the question lingers: can Hong Kong build its way out of this crisis, or is something deeper, more systemic, standing in the way? Number 5. The social cost of inequality. When walls get smaller, the gaps between people grow wider. In Hong Kong, the housing crisis is not just about the physical squeeze. It's about how that squeeze tears at the social fabric of the city itself. What happens behind those thin plywood partitions doesn't stay there. It spreads into schools, workplaces, communities, and generations. Let's start with opportunity, or rather the lack of it. Children growing up in subdivided flats face barriers long before they reach a classroom. A report by Oxfam Hong Kong in early 2025 revealed that nearly 68% of youth living in coffin homes or subdivided units failed to complete secondary school on time. The reasons are painfully clear: no quiet place to study, no access to learning resources, and no sense of stability. How do you prepare for a future when your present is falling apart, square foot by square foot? And the damage doesn't stop at education. Without strong schooling, job prospects become limited. Young people are more likely to enter low-wage, unstable work, further entrenching the cycle of poverty. It's not just one lost opportunity, it's a domino effect that echoes for decades. Then there's the slow erosion of community. Housing inequality doesn't just isolate people physically, it divides them socially. In neighborhoods where some live in high-rise luxury and others in windowless boxes, social cohesion is the first casualty. People stop talking, stop trusting, stop engaging. Residents in subdivided flats often avoid community events or local organizations, not out of disinterest, but out of shame or exclusion. One community worker in Kowloon described it like this: they feel like ghosts in their own neighborhood. And when people don't feel part of a community, they don't feel empowered to speak up. They rarely attend local council meetings, and their voices are missing from policy decisions that directly affect them. In a city built on resilience and civic energy, this silence is dangerous. Now let's talk about stigma. Living in poverty in Hong Kong isn't just hard, it's humiliating. The term coffin home itself, while accurate in scale, carries a weight of shame. Many tenants hide their addresses from employers or school administrators. Children lie to classmates. Adults dread visits from friends or extended family. This invisible weight builds over time. It creates a sense of otherness, a quiet, internalized belief that I don't belong here, I don't matter. And when people start to believe that society loses more than just their potential, it loses their participation. Even more troubling is the effect this inequality has on population dynamics. As the price of rent continues to climb, many low-income families are being pushed out of central districts. Places like Central Causeway Bay or Tsim Sha Tsui are becoming playgrounds for the wealthy, while workers, caregivers, and teachers are forced to live farther and farther from their jobs. This shift is creating what some urban researchers call a dual city, one visible, vibrant, and elite, the other tucked in the shadows, neglected and surviving. Public transportation may bridge the physical distance, but nothing easily bridges the emotional one. And so the question we must ask is no longer just, can we house everyone? It's what kind of city do we become if we don't? Because housing isn't just shelter, it's dignity, it's connection, it's the invisible glue that holds a society together. Without it, we're not just building inequality, we're building walls between people that even the tallest skyscrapers can't hide. Number 6. Housing as a human right. What if we stopped asking how to survive in Hong Kong and started asking how to live, truly live with space, with dignity, with hope? For too long, housing in Hong Kong has been treated like a commodity, something to buy, sell, flip, or hold, not something to live in. But what if we flipped the script? What if instead of trying to patch a broken system, we dared to imagine a new one designed not just to house people, but to uplift them? In cities like Vienna, over 60% of residents live in high-quality government-subsidized housing. These are not cramped or neglected places. They're spacious, well-designed, and integrated into vibrant neighborhoods. In Singapore, over 80% of citizens live in public housing, supported by strong policies and long-term planning. These models prove one thing: when housing is treated as infrastructure like schools, hospitals, or transit, it becomes a foundation for equality, not a symbol of it. So why not Hong Kong? The city has the wealth, the creativity, the density. What it needs is a shift in mindset from crisis response to visionary design. In early 2025, a group of young architects and urban planners launched Living Futures, a grassroots coalition advocating for human-centered housing. Their proposal: transform underused industrial sites into modular co-living communities, spaces built sustainably, affordably, and fast. It is bold, but more importantly, it is possible. We're also seeing hope from the ground up. Local nonprofits like Impact HK are piloting housing-first programs that not only offer shelter, but wrap-around services, mental health support, job training, and community mentorship. Another group, Light B Housing, has developed a model called social tenancy, matching landlords willing to accept below-market rent with individuals rebuilding their lives. Since 2023, they've housed more than 300 families, proof that compassion can be scaled. Technology is joining the fight too. With 3D printed construction, a basic home structure can now be assembled in under 24 hours. In Europe and Japan, portable micro-units are being tested for emergency housing and transitional living. These innovations may not solve everything, but they challenge us to think bigger and build smarter. But structural change needs more than structure. It needs people, especially the next generation, to demand something better. In universities across Hong Kong, students are using film photography and digital media to expose the invisible layers of inequality in their own neighborhoods. One short documentary, Boxes in the Sky, went viral in 2024, sparking debate about housing justice in both academic and policy circles. This isn't just awareness, it's pressure, and it's working. Still, the most powerful tool may be the simplest one, asking different questions. Instead of, how many people can we squeeze into one building? What if we asked, what kind of lives do we want people to live inside these walls? Instead of, what is the market willing to bear? What if we asked, what is society willing to accept? Because at the heart of all of this is one basic truth. Housing is not just about shelter. It is about stability, safety, belonging. When someone has a home, they can think about tomorrow, they can find work, raise children, heal, dream. Hong Kong stands at a crossroads. Behind the skyline of steel and glass lies a housing crisis that affects hundreds of thousands, shrinking lives into boxes, testing the limits of human dignity. But this story isn't just about hardship, it's about possibility. If governments, businesses, nonprofits, and communities come together, change is not only necessary, it's achievable. Because in the end, a truly prosperous city isn't measured by how high its towers rise, but by how well it lifts those living at the bottom. If this story moved you, we invite you to leave a comment, share your thoughts, or subscribe for more real human stories from around the world. This is NVL Travel Documentary. Thank you for watching and for caring.